Search for a lifeline.
Never one to give up, I want to assure all of you and our competitor that we are determined to see Virgin Australia back up and running soon.
Good evening, I'm Juanita Phillips. This is ABC News. Back on dry land, dozens of Ruby Princess crew members a step closer to home. Some elective surgery set to resume as coronavirus cases continue to fall. The fallout as Malcolm Turnbull takes aim at former colleagues.
They operate like a terrorist. Now, they don't use guns and bombs, I hasten to add, but it is the technique of terrorism.
And extra funding to fix a dangerous problem in bushfire-ravaged communities. Thousands of jobs are on the line after the biggest corporate collapse so far due to coronavirus. But the administrators of Virgin Australia say no redundancies are planned. The government has again ruled out any bailout. It says a number of investors are interested in rescuing the airline. Andrew Robertson begins our coverage.
With worry written all over their faces, Virgin Australia workers fronted the media on the airline's darkest day. It's twice in 20 years that Australia's second airline has collapsed, and just like in 2001 with Ansett, its staff feeling the pain.
Virgin Australia is something like my other mother. I love it like another mother.
There to offer support, unions and the federal opposition leader, all demanding the government step up to the mark.
All of these workers who we'll hear from today are proud of their job, and the least they can expect is a government that will defend it.
Our plan was always about seeing two viable airlines on the other side, two viable airlines that would be there not just 1 year from now, but 5 years and 10 years from now.
The administrators are now poring over Virgin Australia's books, and at a news conference where social distancing seemed forgotten, they assured staff their jobs are safe for now.
There is no plans to make any redundancies. Wages will continue to be paid.
We always knew that there was work to do on the balance sheet, and that is something that we'll be addressing more aggressively through the actions of the voluntary administration.
With more than $5 billion in debt, Virgin's current structure is untenable, and the airline which emerges from administration will be very different.
Going back to being a domestic-only airline could work very well. Cutting the number of routes could work very well.
More than 10 parties, including private equity firms and other airlines, have expressed interest in buying Virgin and reshaping it. A relief to the government after it stood firm in refusing a request for a $1.4 billion lifeline.
The government was not going to bail out 5 large foreign shareholders with deep pockets.
Those deep-pocketed shareholders are Etihad, Singapore Airlines, 2 Chinese firms and a company controlled by Virgin founder Richard Branson.
In most countries, federal governments have stepped in this unprecedented crisis for aviation to help their airlines. Sadly, that has not happened in Australia.
While the Velocity Frequent Flyer program is not in administration, points are being frozen for 4 weeks, although the company says they will eventually be honoured. And in more bad news for passengers, if Virgin comes out of administration, giving Qantas a much bigger slice of the domestic market, airfares will almost certainly rise. Andrew Robertson, ABC News.
About 8,000 Virgin Australia staff have already been stood down after the airline reduced the number of flights about a month ago. When you include contractors, Virgin employs almost 13,000 people. The biggest number of staff are in Queensland, and here in New South Wales there are almost 3,000 workers. Some staff had previously worked at Ansett, so this collapse is the second they've been through.
This is the sort of family culture that staff at Virgin Australia are fighting for. Away from any glamour associated with the brand, thousands of jobs are on the line.
I was under no illusion that our business would be impacted by the crisis.
Like all arms of the business, crew members stood down for now have found themselves just waiting and hoping for the best.
16,000 jobs, that is just a number that you can't comprehend. and I have been so lucky to be a part of other areas of the business. So there's a massive human element for me.
For staff, this morning's announcement loomed large.
Certainly going into it very apprehensive, like a night of anxiety, and what does voluntary administration mean after the Ansett debacle? It wasn't a great outcome.
Pilot Andrew Backstrom would know. He spent 8 years at Ansett Australia before it collapsed and he moved to Virgin, where he's now worked for 19 years. This morning's briefing to staff by the Virgin CEO allayed some concerns, but it's revived memories from the last airline collapse.
As a pilot, I could pursue another career somewhere else, whereas ground handlers who'd been there a long time, check-in staff, things like that, they didn't have the options open to them that we did.
Up until last month, Virgin Australia was flying to more than 40 destinations across Australia and more than 10 overseas. It's also provided critical transport options for regional communities now struggling.
Connectivity via our airlines is absolutely integral to our future economy, and it will be critical in how quickly we can recover from this.
Baggage handler Josh Hooper is just desperate to get back to work.
We like coming in here, and some of us feel a little bit lost if we don't get to come in here each day. But we do look forward to coming back, so that's what keeps us going.
With the sheer number of jobs on the line, there's a quiet confidence among Virgin staff that the airline is simply too big to fail and it can't be allowed to happen. Stephanie Zillman, ABC News, Brisbane.
It was a day that perhaps they thought would never come, but almost 50 crew members from the Ruby Princess have started their journey home. They're being quarantined tonight in Sydney, swapping their cabins for hotel rooms before being allowed to board flights. The ship has been linked to 21 deaths and hundreds of cases of coronavirus. Here's crime reporter Mark Reddy.
For more than a month, they've been begging the Australian authorities to go home. And today, that wish came true for 49 crew stranded on the Ruby Princess, although it was met with scepticism.
I'm feeling very nervous because until, I'm not on that plane, anything can happen.
Before the crew boarded buses at Port Kembla, their manager took to the loudspeaker, recognising the traumatic impact the coronavirus pandemic has had on board.
This invisible virus has incredible power. We can't see it, but we see the results of what it's doing. This virus can't break us.
One infected crew member was sent to hospital for treatment. The rest will spend at least a night in hotels across Sydney. And as for the more than 1,000 still at sea, their future is no clearer.
At least half will stay on the ship.
A further 300 to 400 crew could be taken off the ship and brought to hotels in Sydney tomorrow. But it all depends on whether flights have been organised in advance. As for the Ruby Princess itself, the police commissioner is confident it will set sail on Thursday.
Won't be fully COVID free. There still will be some crew members who are COVID positive.
This has not been a medical or humanitarian operation. This has been secretive. This has been a covert job.
Most crew fear speaking out will cost them their job. Others have had enough.
I really think that people should come first and not the opposite.
A message for authorities and the ship's operator, Carnival Australia. Mark Reddy, ABC News, Sydney.
Children will return to public schools 1 day a week from May the 11th. The Premier has given more details about how Term 2 will work. It includes smaller class sizes and a big focus on hygiene. Here's State Political reporter Ashley Raper with the details.
This is what we can expect in Term 2. From May the 11th, the start of Week 3, students will go back to school 1 day a week. On the other days, they'll keep learning at home. Importantly, if a parent needs to send their child to school every day, they can. The aim is to have about 25% of students there per day to ensure social distancing in the classroom and more space in the playground. How to work in practice is up to individual schools. They may group children in their house colours or alphabetically. And the Premier hopes siblings will be able to go to school on the same day.
Please respect the guidelines that your school puts in place about the return to school, and if we all manage it together, it means we can have normality back sooner rather than later.
Today's announcement introduces levels of complexity with respect to logistics and administration that we could have done without.
To address concerns about work health and safety, the government has promised there'll be plenty of hand sanitiser, soap and more cleaners at schools. And if they want, they can also do temperature checks. Drop-off and pick-up times are likely to be staggered, as well as recess and lunch. And classrooms are likely to be restricted to a maximum of 10 people. Private and Catholic schools are still finalising all their plans for Term 2. The government anticipates the 1 day a week at public schools will eventually increase over time, so Term 3 is back to normal.
A third aged care resident has died at Newmarch House Nursing Home in Sydney's West, taking the state's death toll to 31. And a healthcare worker at St George Hospital in Sydney's South tested positive to coronavirus this morning. Health authorities say there is no risk to patients there and all close contacts of the worker have been isolated. For each of the past 2 days, New South Wales recorded just 6 new cases of coronavirus. The state's total is 2,969. Around 250 people are being treated for the infection, most at home or in residential care. And 21 people are in intensive care. There's been 1 extra case reported at Newmarch House, bringing the total there to 42. Early studies show that half of all patients take at least 16 days to fully recover. But for 1 in 4, it takes at least 3 weeks. National Cabinet has agreed to ease restrictions for the first time since the crisis began. From Monday, some elective surgeries will be allowed to resume a month after non-urgent procedures were cancelled. And state and territory leaders also gave in-principle support to a new tracing app set to be released within days. From Canberra, here's political reporter Jane Norman.
This is an important decision because it marks another step on the way back. There is a road back.
Navigating this crisis has required a warp-speed response, draconian measures changing every aspect of the way Australians live their lives. But for the first time, a turning point.
Today we agreed to lift restrictions on elective surgery after Anzac Day, after the long weekend.
A gradual easing of the ban will see about 25% of surgeries resume, those considered Category 2 and urgent Category 3, including IVF, joint replacements and cataracts. For under 18s, all procedures given the green light.
Some people think elective surgery sounds like it's something that's not important. It is incredibly important. Some elective surgery is life-saving.
It's possible because COVID cases are so low and have remained so for more than a week.
We now have a sustained and consolidated flattening of the curve.
Despite the promising news, National Cabinet wants to wait another 3 weeks before deciding what further restrictions could be lifted, although that won't stop some states from moving sooner. But central to these decisions will be an assurance that the health system can cope in the event of an outbreak. And the Prime Minister's putting his faith in a new mobile phone app designed to supercharge contact tracing for COVID cases.
Yes, I will be downloading it.
Rachel Falk leads a cyber agency that's been assessing the security of the new app. Based on the Singapore model, it'll use Bluetooth technology to track who users have been in close contact with.
I come from a position of fact, so I can talk about what I've seen so far, and so far I am comfortable with what I've seen.
The government's aiming for a 40% uptake.
The Commonwealth will have no access to that data.
Hoping assurances like that will sway suspicions. Jane Norman, ABC News, Canberra.
Quick check of the weather now, and we've got a pretty warm week ahead despite a few cold fronts lurking about, Graham.
Yeah, Juanita, basically a high pressure system is the dominant feature now. Underneath that, most of the state will see clear skies and relatively light winds, and temperatures won't change a great deal. The only variation will be in the southern districts, and this is due to a couple of cold fronts just set to clip Victoria. That will bring some bursts of slightly stronger winds, perhaps a few showers about the southern slopes on Friday, but generally clear, dry and sunny weather, and I'll be back with those forecast details shortly.
Thanks, Graham. Still to come this hour, the trials of running lessons at home.
Your budget, Reed?
It was my worst nightmare. I've never been a homeschooler. I've never wanted to be a homeschooler.
Hopefully that's what we'll have in 4 to 6 weeks is teachers back in the classroom.
I think teachers are feeling exactly like cat and fodder.
Also, I'll talk to the Chief Executive of Virgin about the future of the troubled airline. That's coming up.
The bitter decades-old dispute between former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull and his predecessor has erupted again. Tony Abbott has described as odious comments about the influence Chief of Staff Peter Credlin had over him and his government. But as political editor Andrew Probyn reports, the current Prime Minister has refused to be drawn on Mr Turnbull's explosive memoir.
After you had been dumped as Prime Minister.
A prime ministerial tell-all with plenty of targets.
Abbott and others and their friends in the Murdoch media, they overthrew my government and overthrew my Prime Ministership.
That chaotic week in August 2018 saw Peter Dutton emerge as an unlikely challenger. When Matthias Cormann abandoned Turnbull to back his best mate, stopping the Queensland hardliner became Turnbull's priority.
If Dutton had become leader, not even Bill Shorten could have lost the election.
Malcolm has presented his version of history. It differs substantially from my clear recollection of events.
This is my leader. Scott Morrison came through the middle. Turnbull suspicious his successor had played a double game all along.
I know Scott very well. He is a lifelong political operator. And he is a control freak.
On this issue, I'm just going to remain focused on the actual bigger picture, and that's dealing with the coronavirus.
Turnbull reserves special venom for the man he toppled.
Shit happens.
Saying Tony Abbott acted dangerously when domestic terrorism was the biggest security risk.
Abbott was determined to ramp up the rhetoric in a way that was calculated to inflame animosity against Muslims. That made Australia less safe.
Abbott, he says, under the spell of his formidable Chief of Staff, Peter Credlin.
Peter was running the country. It was a truly bizarre relationship.
I am aware of some pretty odious comments, and she was a trusted colleague.
As much as Malcolm Turnbull's book reflects on a brutal, untidy period in politics, it also reveals the personal toll of an earlier leadership tussle.
I felt these thoughts of death, of self-destruction coming into my mind unbidden and unwanted.
Power games ruthlessly raw. Andrew Probyn, ABC News, Canberra.
One of the most terrifying aspects for those caught up in the bushfires was being completely cut off from the outside world. At times, there was no mobile reception, no text alerts and no working landlines. Bushfire inquiries are investigating the failures. For now, the government has announced $6 million to help address mobile phone black spots in bushfire-prone areas.
With landlines out and no mobile reception, Deanna and David O'Neill had to resort to walkie-talkies to communicate with their neighbours during the bushfire emergency.
I needed to know what was going on here, what roads were open, where my children were.
In this disaster, many residents had to take risks to get mobile phone reception.
People had to actually get in and drive potentially over roads that are closed to get any sort of communications.
It's only been in the past couple of weeks that some communities around here have got their internet back.
Which was difficult for the school, it was difficult for people to operate a business. There was no EFTPOS, there was no ways of communication.
Telecommunications failures will be a big focus during the inquiries into the New South Wales bushfires. When the power went out, towers went down and those on the NBN lost their landlines in areas where mobile reception was scarce.
There were many more sites that were knocked out by lack of power than by actual fire damage.
Tens of thousands of people were left without communications for at least 3 days, many for up to a fortnight, some in remote areas for months.
At the height of the crisis in early January, up to about 150 mobile phone base stations were off the air across New South Wales, Victoria and South Australia.
The $6 million in mobile black spot funding announced today will pay for new base stations in 16 bushfire affected areas in New South Wales, but it's only part of the solution.
Look, the biggest problem with telecommunications during the bushfire season recently actually had a lot to do with electricity.
Payphones in rural and remote areas are being seen as more necessary than ever.
What we want to do is have a communications network that is as resilient as possible.
At a time when people need to be connected. Philippa McDonald, ABC News.
A mid-North Coast couple whose farm was devastated in the bushfires have finally received a government disaster loan after 6 months of waiting. David and Carolyn Duff applied for the $130,000 loan 2 days after the fires went through their beef and soybean property in November. Their application was approved in January, but in a story featured on ABC News on Sunday, the Duffs revealed they had still not received the money. Within 24 hours, the loan was deposited into their bank account.
Prior to this, we were calculating weekly as to whether we could keep spending money, to try and recover back from the bushfire, and this just shores that confidence up that we can continue until that money's used up.
The Duffs say the loan will allow them to retain 6 workers on their property. More than 1,000 primary producers have received recovery grants totalling more than $67 million. Donald Trump says he will suspend all immigration into the US because of coronavirus. In a late-night announcement on Twitter, he said the temporary move would protect American jobs. But the calls are growing louder from a small number of protesters who want restrictions eased, not on migrants, but on orders for them to stay at home. Some of the demonstrators were heavily armed. North America correspondent David Lipson reports.
America is a nation afflicted, and its temperature is rising.
Stop! Get in the car! Stop!
Now, protesters demanding an end to the lockdowns are coming heavily armed.
Who brings guns? Are you threatening him?
The protests are small but widespread, grassroots but orchestrated nationally by groups with shady links to politics and business, like Freedom Works, which helped launch the Tea Party movement.
There's dark money coming in from major wealthy donors and from some business groups.
Some healthcare workers have tried to stop them going ahead.
It's ridiculous to sit here and tell me that I have to move because you're out here debating.
But every day the president spurs them on.
I don't know whether very many of these people would actually be out there if President Trump was not encouraging it.
The way they've lived, it's not great, it's terrible. Maybe the first 3 days, and then all of a sudden, you see what's going on. They want to get going.
The vast majority of voters, Republican and Democrat, accept the restrictions are necessary.
Nobody disagrees that we want to get out of this situation. Nobody. You don't need protests to convince anyone in this country that we have to get back to work.
But as the food lines get longer, the push to reopen for business is growing. The loudest call to open for business is coming from the president, and some states are starting to respond. Texas, Tennessee, Georgia and South Carolina are all easing restrictions. All are led by Republican governors. Every recovery is cause for cheer. This New Jersey facility notching up 800 healthy patients discharged, a rare positive milestone worth celebrating. David Lipson, ABC News, Washington.
The Bureau of Statistics has updated its jobs figures to reflect the impact of coronavirus, and they show a 6% fall in the number of jobs up to the start of April, with young people worst affected. Here's Alan Kohler.
New jobs data is based on a recent innovation of single-touch payroll, which has firms reporting their tax to the ATO every payday. And the ABS has been collecting that data since January the 1st, and this is what it looks like. 8% increase up to the end of February, but then a 6% decline from March the 14th to April the 4th, which is not very long. For those under 20, the decline is 10%. Tasmania is the worst affected state, down 7.3%, and wages have fallen 6.7%. And remember, that's only up to a fortnight ago. Meanwhile, Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe gave a rare press conference today and supported the government's prediction of 10% unemployment by June, with total hours worked expected to be down 20%. But he also said the economy might begin its bounce back in the September quarter.
If this is how things play out, the economy could be expected to grow very strongly next year, with GDP growth of perhaps 6 or 7%, after a fall of around 6% this year.
Today's big news on global markets was that the oil price went below zero. That is, it went negative, minus $37 a barrel. Gobs were smacked around the world when this popped up on market screens. How could it happen? Well, demand for oil has fallen so much you can't sell it, and there's nowhere to store it, so the price of storage has soared, and buyers have to be compensated for that. The local share market had a 2.5% fall today, with energy stocks the hardest hit, as you'd expect. There were also falls in New York last night and Asia today. And the Australian dollar eased a little to 63.2 US cents. And that's finance.
Cricket Australia has defended its decision to stand down hundreds of staff members on 20% pay because of the health crisis. The CEO says the organisation faced the prospect of losing hundreds of millions of dollars. He says Cricket Australia's budget could be hit hard if a planned tour by India this summer doesn't happen.
If you contemplate the prospect of the international season in particular being affected, we have an issue of hundreds of millions of dollars on our hands. So it's very important that we plan proactively for that. We do everything possible to stage the season.
Cricket Australia says it's already saved $20 million, including $3 million from the staff stand-downs. Returned travellers quarantined at a hotel in Sydney CBD have been enjoying some live entertainment. Singer-songwriter Johnny Diesel was the star attraction, watched by guests from their balconies. Many were grateful to have a distraction from 14 days confined to their rooms. Some will be able to leave in the next few days, but more international arrivals are expected to take their place. Back to the weather now, and things staying pretty much as they are for the time being, Graham.
Yeah, they do, Anita, all the way through until next Monday at this stage. Very little variation in the temperatures or the weather conditions. Now today, the minimums were coolest in the southwest suburbs. 8.3 at Badgerys Creek was 3 below average, but a maximum of 27 at the airport was actually 4 degrees above the April average this afternoon. The minimums were cool about the northeastern coast, although they were warmer than usual about the northwest corner. Now, cloud cleared from the south of the state, but it has lingered about parts of the central areas. There was a little bit of virga about the central and northern slopes and plains through the afternoon, but nothing registering in the gauges. Now, the cloud over the state will continue to clear as the moisture gets cut off from Western Australia, and a high pressure system is going to maintain a very stable atmosphere. Now, the high itself will also keep cold fronts well south of the state. And as far as the state goes, it's really only the far southern districts likely to see some increasing winds and cloud at times associated with those fronts over the coming days. Now, the potential for showers in any of the southern capitals remains very low tomorrow, although we are expecting to see very windy conditions across Tasmania. There may even be some snow about the very highest peaks. So for our state, a dry and mostly sunny day. Generally light winds, although they will tend moderate at times across the southern districts, particularly as a cold front moves out into the southern Tasman Sea. So in the northeast, we've got a few areas of patchy fog in the morning. It'll be a sunny and dry day, and winds will tend light by the afternoon. We've also got mostly moderate strength winds on the waters through the day. For southern areas, that moderate westerly wind flow should mostly keep the minimums above frost level. And we will see a mild to warm, dry and sunny day to follow. We've also got strong winds on the Eden waters, anywhere south of Merimbula. Once again, that's due to the front moving out into the Tasman Sea, but those winds should ease off fairly quickly as we head into tomorrow evening. Now, we've got a cool morning on the slopes. That's going to be followed by a sunny day throughout, and we've got light to moderate strength winds right across the region, but those temperatures looking very pleasant through the afternoon. Now, for our waters, moderate strength winds are expected in the morning, but they will ease as we move into the afternoon. Our lows will range from 11 to 16, with tops reaching 24 to 27. It will be a sunny day with moderate winds in the morning, and they will tend light by the afternoon. Now, as you can see, temperatures really don't change a great deal all the way through till Sunday. It's on Friday and Sunday. As frontal systems move through Victoria, we'll see slightly warmer temperatures as those winds tend fractionally more northwesterly. A very weak cool change could just clip the coastal areas on Monday, but we return back to dry, sunny conditions Tuesday, Juanita.
Thanks, Graham. Lee Sales is here now with 7:30.
Hello and welcome to 7:30. It's the highest profile casualty so far of the pandemic. The nation's second largest airline, Virgin Australia, is in the hands of administrators, and it's anybody's guess how things will end up. The company was already about $5 billion in debt before coronavirus hit. 10,000 jobs are at stake, not to mention the rivalry with Qantas that helps keep airfares competitive in Australia. Shortly, I'll be talking to Virgin's chief executive. First, this report from Carrington Clark.
As an Indigenous kid growing up in Sydney, Carly Belair dreamed of becoming a pilot. He got his flying licence before he learned to drive.
It was year 8 in high school where I got the bug of flying.
But after 17 years as a domestic airline captain with Virgin, he's been stood down and could face a tough decision.
If I was to relocate my family overseas to another job, I would have to leave everything behind and take up a role there. Otherwise, there's only so much another airline can take in Australia. The other option is I just leave flying altogether and leave behind all the experience I've gained so far.
Forced to ground most of its fleet in response to the coronavirus pandemic, Virgin has now gone into voluntary administration to try and restructure its crippling $5 billion debt burden.
Our board made a very courageous decision last night to put the company into voluntary administration and do so quickly with the intent of working with our administrator Deloitte to come through and be as strong as we possibly can on the other side of this crisis.
Yeah, the news is certainly disappointing. It's something that you wouldn't want anyone to go through, particularly when you've made a commitment in your life as your career path.
When Virgin launched with the support of flamboyant British businessman Richard Branson at the turn of the century, it was known as Virgin Blue, a cut-price competitor in a market dominated by Qantas and Ansett. But after Ansett's collapse in 2001, Virgin upgraded its services to go head-to-head with Qantas.
I think it's an exciting day for the travelling public in Australia.
Virgin essentially got to the position it is today because of issues with its shareholders, a strategic plan that wanted to take the airline head-to-head with Qantas in the corporate market. That was a very tough battle for it.
Virgin has been pleading for a $1.4 billion lifeline from the government in order to stay afloat, but it was rebuffed.
The government was not going to bail out 5 large foreign shareholders with deep pockets who together own 90% of this airline.
It might be called Virgin Australia, but it's majority foreign-owned. As well as Richard Branson's 10% stake, Chinese companies Nanshan Group and H&A Group hold another 40%, while Singapore Airlines and Etihad Airways own 20% each.
I have so much pride when I put on that uniform, that purple tie, that grey suit. I walk out the door, and when someone says to me, what do you do for work? I'm very quick to jump in and answer, I'm a flight attendant with Virgin Australia. I love it with all my heart. It is me.
Brett Hopwood has been a Virgin flight attendant for 16 years.
At this particular stage, I'd say that I don't want to work for another airline. I worked for Virgin proudly for the last 16 years, and I'd move on to something and give my all to another industry.
Keep us in the air and keep it fair.
Please help us to keep flying. Last week, Virgin flight attendants across the country added their voices to the campaign for government intervention.
Please, please say Mummy's job.
We need help from anywhere that we can get it. I would love to see the government step in.
The government shouldn't step in to rescue the Virgin Australia organisation with its $5 billion debt incurred by foreign owners.
Alan Fells was the head of the competition regulator when Ansett collapsed. He said the government shouldn't bail out Virgin, but it should help new owners keep the airline going.
Airlines are a critical part of Australia's infrastructure, same as public transport. And experience shows in airlines and elsewhere, but airlines especially, that an airline monopoly is not good for consumers or the community.
Band manager Ben Dennis has been a regular flyer on Virgin, accruing a huge amount of frequent flyer points.
I've got a couple of 100,000, so that's enough to get me a couple of business flights to and from London.
Virgin has said its frequent flyer program, Velocity, has not been placed in administration, but it has stopped any redemptions from the program for at least 4 weeks.
I'm definitely concerned as to what the healthiness of Virgin Velocity will be after the administrator kicks in and potentially sells off the company, and how the value of those points will be taken after that.
It went all over the shop.
But Ben's concerns are far deeper than his own frequent flyer points.
So the competitive nature under a two-airline country means you can negotiate better deals. It means that the music industry, for example, negotiated a really great deal to give bands excess baggage so that they don't need to pay huge sums of money to fly gear around the country. With one airline, you lose that power of negotiation.
Going into administration means Virgin could save hundreds of millions of dollars by renegotiating lease agreements for big budget items such as aircraft and terminals to reduce its debt. The hope is new owners will be found to keep the airline going.
Any prospective person who wants to own an airline, here you go. Here's a great organisation, stripped away or debt reduced and restructured. It's a very attractive proposition, and I'm certain that Virgin will fly out of this.
Everyone loses if we have a Qantas monopoly. So the government needs to take some action to help get a second airline afloat.
For her take on Virgin, here's Chief Political Correspondent Laura Tingle.
Even as the Prime Minister today announced the first real easing of restrictions imposed in the wake of the health crisis.
Well, good afternoon, everyone.
News that Virgin Australia had become a spectacular victim of the economic crisis was ricocheting around the country. Confirmation that Virgin was being placed in voluntary administration was hardly unexpected. Its public pleading for assistance from government, or anyone else for that matter, since aviation was effectively closed down last month, has been a daily feature of the news. The initial prognosis from administrators today was pretty upbeat in the circumstances.
There is no plans to make any redundancies. Wages will continue to be paid.
But the spectre of what would be the biggest aviation collapse in Australia's history, if it eventuated, came one step closer on a day of otherwise sobering economic news.
But over the first half of 2020, we are likely to experience the biggest contraction in national output and national income that we've witnessed since the 1930s.
All this grim news forms an integral part of the story of how governments now deal with the future of Virgin Australia. The political risk here is that Virgin becomes the go-to image of the coronavirus slump, not just of its economic cost, but the competence of the government in dealing with it.
The government says that they want a market-based solution, but it is government policy, and it's good policy, to protect Australians' health which has shut down this market. There is no market here today.
The Morrison government in Canberra has been playing hardball, determined not to open the door to specific corporate bailouts, insisting that the market can find a solution, and being determined not to simply hand over money to foreign shareholders.
I'm encouraged by the fact that there are already 10 parties that have expressed interest in working with the administrator regarding Virgin's future.
The government's hard line is one of the reasons the Virgin board moved to call in the administrators. It represents not just an ideological position, but a tough assessment about what is going to happen in the economy for some years to come, with international travel restricted and a travelling public constrained by unemployment, and lost income.
People will be looking at coming in, looking at the profitable sections, the profitable routes potentially. They won't be interested in flying as I've flown on Virgin into your Gladstones or into Townsville or into Mackay. They'll be interested in cherry picking.
This now looks like dangerous territory for the government. With workers reassured they will not lose their jobs, the issue will be just how competitive Virgin will be in future, particularly on those non-trunk routes into regional areas in the Coalition's heartland, and the heartland of tourism, where it has made such a competitive difference.
Virgin Australia's Chief Executive is Paul Scurrah. Paul Scurrah, what's Virgin going to look like on the other side of this? Will you be more like a budget domestic carrier like Jetstar?
Well, it's hard to see that happening, Lee, but ultimately the decision will be one for the new owners of the airline. If I think what I see happening, I think what's in the best interest of the country is to make sure that there's robust competition across the full-service market and the low-cost market. But again, that's a decision that will be ultimately up to the new owners of the airline.
Lots of your customers would be watching tonight, so let me ask you about some things they'd be worried about. Many people who had flight bookings cancelled haven't had a refund yet. Will they see one?
Well, again, that's a question for the administrator, but I know in order to allow them to settle in and to get a handle on the role that they have to play and the task that they have at hand, that refunds have been suspended for this period of time.
There's also been a freeze put on people's ability to redeem their frequent flyer points. Is that because you've had a run on them in the past 48 hours with people fearing the company would collapse?
Well, it's actually been longer than that, Lee. When we first approached the government and at the very start of the crisis, we, like every airline in the world, we had our revenue cut off. All the borders were shut. We pretty much shut down. And that put a lot of pressure on our business. When we went to the government and first suggested that we had a liquidity need of $1.4 billion, unfortunately that became public, and that actually caused a lot of concern and a loss of confidence in our airline. So ever since that time, we've seen a run on points in our frequent flyer program. And I think in order to preserve the value of the asset that the administrators are working with, it's an important decision to make to give us the best chance of getting the best value.
You mentioned...
I have to say, though, Lee, those points are not at risk. They are covered. They are cash-backed in a trust. So our customers can be assured that those points are safe.
You mentioned the $1.4 billion loan that Virgin has sought from the Australian government, which has been denied. The government says it would be ludicrous to start saving individual companies in this environment, that it has to let market forces do their work and it needs to offer support on an industry-wide basis. Isn't that a sensible and prudent approach?
Yeah, well, absolutely it is, and that's one we've been advocating for from day one. If you look around the world, every single airline in the world is suffering. Every single airline has lost billions and billions of dollars in revenue. We believe every airline in this region will at some point in the not-too-distant future will need some help. We have never asked for support in our own right. We have never asked for a bailout. Our shareholders, as much as they would have liked to have put cash into our business, we're not in a position to do so. They're all airlines. If they are getting support from their governments are putting rules on where they can spend that money, and it certainly wasn't here to help us. So we have always advocated for sector-wide support. We've never asked to be bailed out in our own right, and we always knew that what we're asking for would be either a repayable instrument or an equity-like instrument that would have wiped out our current shareholding.
You've already stood down 80% of your direct workforce and announced 1,000 redundancies in the past few weeks. Will there be more redundancies to come?
Well, again, I can't look forward to see what the new ownership structure is like, but our administrator, Vaughan Strawbridge from Deloitte today, made it clear that it's not their intention to force redundancies through this process. And I think that's a good and prudent decision. If I take off my airline CEO hat for a moment and think about what's right for the country and for the tourism industry, it's someone that can go head-to-head with the opposition here. It's not someone that can only operate 1 or 2 or 3 routes that happen to be profitable. And if we are to be in that sort of position, then preserving the maximum amount of jobs is the right and prudent thing to do.
Nobody disputes this is an unprecedented crisis, and I know that you've only been there for 12 months yourself, but don't Virgin's management and board have a case to answer here to your shareholders and your staff in particular that the company went into this crisis in such a weak financial state that you've not been able to stay afloat for even 1 month into it?
One of the things that I said the very day I got the job is that we are a great airline. There's been a massive investment by the shareholders that were up until yesterday in control of this airline. They spent something like $6 billion and something like 10 years post Virgin Blue, when it made a decision to turn itself into a full-service airline, $6 billion to turn it into a very, very robust competitor. It has gotten a big foothold into the corporate and business market, but it was carrying a bit too much debt on its balance sheet. And I think when you look forward in the future, every airline that's been through this crisis knows that they're going to have a balance sheet that weathers some sort of black swan event. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest changes you'll see, and we will be no different.
A lot of people who fly Virgin would watch this show. I'm sure they appreciate you coming on tonight to share your insights with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lee.
The debate about whether or not children should go to school is one of the most contentious of the pandemic. Term 2 is gradually resuming around Australia. Lucy Carter takes a look.
It's just before 9 a.m. and Julie is getting her children ready for school. But like millions of other Australian children right now, these kids are being taught at home.
It was my worst nightmare. That was the first thing that went through my mind. And then after that was, well, if I'm going to do this, I need to do it properly. It's all or nothing.
Okay, your budget, Reed. Just have a look for a second.
Julie's children range from year 1 through to year 10.
The day's planned out in hourly blocks, and every hour is accounted for.
We all love the beach.
Every week we've been learning about a different culture, different country. So when we learned about Italy, for example, we made tiramisu, we made pasta, we made pizza.
So we're going to read The Rabbit.
Julie's a freelance writer and fits her flexible hours around the school day. She says what's been tough for every Australian parent is mixed messaging about whether schools should stay open.
I'm not a teacher and I'm not a doctor. So I'm not the expert here, and we're relying on the government to give us this information, and it's not coming as clearly as it should be.
Being told that somehow schools were different, that there was an exception, that you could gather in groups of less than 50, except at school where over 50 would be fine somehow, just seemed completely inconsistent and confusing to parents.
After opposing school closures throughout March, last week the federal government announced that states and territories could decide for themselves.
What all parents need to understand is that we live in a federation, and each state and territory under that federation have responsibility for the decisions that are made when it comes to schools.
What's emerged is far from consistent. Term 2 started last week in Victoria. All students were told to study from home, with schools available for children who don't have access to equipment or supervision. It'll be the same in Tasmania when Term 2 starts there next week. New South Wales parents are also being encouraged to keep children at home if they can, with a staggered return to school flagged from mid-May. In the Northern Territory, all students were expected back in the classroom this week. South Australia and Western Australia will keep schools open, but leave the final choice up to parents. In Queensland, at least the first 5 weeks of Term 2 will be online. Schools are still open for kids who can't stay home. The ACT is also encouraging remote learning, with a few schools kept open for limited supervision.
The medical expert panel, which is made up of the Commonwealth Chief Medical Officer and all state and territory medical officers, has said consistently right through this pandemic that schools are safe to be open and it's safe for children to attend. The point that they've made is that we need to put in place measures to protect our teachers, and they're continuing to update that advice of the types of measures that schools can put in place.
Hi everyone, as you're joining, feel free to say hello and then just mute your microphone and make sure...
Many teachers are frustrated.
I'm still learning how to use this technology, so please...
Victorian high school teacher Jem Colber says last term was stressful for her and her colleagues.
The PM tells us that we need to be keeping 1.5 metres distance, and it's just completely impossible to do in a classroom. So I actually, I spent, the last couple of weeks of term feeling quite angry and anxious.
She's now teaching her classes remotely, but is concerned by ongoing debate around school closures.
There's a message out there that teachers are glorified babysitters, overpaid babysitters actually. So that has been a bit frustrating, because if you're a teacher, you believe in education rather than supervising students.
I think teachers are feeling exactly like cannon fodder. People would talk about how it was so important to keep schools open for healthcare workers, as if teachers didn't matter, as if teachers didn't deserve to even be consulted.
The federal government says it's doing what it can to take the concerns of teachers on board.
We all understand that it's not a babysitting role, it's an educating role, and we want those teachers playing that role, and I think that's what everyone wants to see. And if everyone can keep playing their role in flattening the curve, hopefully that's what we'll have in 4 to 6 weeks, is teachers back in the classroom doing their role, which is educating.
Some parents have no choice but to keep sending their children to school.
I don't have that level of expertise that a teacher has, and I have a commitment to continue to work for the pregnant women of Logan. And I really felt myself in a tough spot as to, how would I juggle that priority.
As a midwife, Jude Coos is an essential worker. Her daughter Monica will attend school from the start of term 2. She's comfortable with this decision, but also wants the states, territories and federal government to be more consistent with their messaging.
Just adds to that level of anxiety of how's this going to affect me and the people I work with. I'm not alone. I'm one of thousands of frontline workers going through the same thing.
Australia is successfully flattening the curve, and attention's now shifting to easing some restrictions. But you only have to look overseas to see how easily and quickly the virus can get out of control. Samantha Hawley reports from the UK, which is on track to be the worst hit country in Europe.
Coming forward. And they're off.
Cheltenham, March 13.
Held up towards the back of the field.
One of the most prestigious events on the British racing calendar.
Album photo! Back-to-back Gold Cups! Album photo!
We had a big horse racing event with 250,000 people going to it, and I just thought, something not right here. There's going to be a lot of people affected by this. My dad was 88 years old, but he was so active, I couldn't keep up with him.
Darryl Blakely died of COVID-19 as the horses took to the track and the punters packed the stands. He was the 12th victim of the virus in the UK.
Well, my dad picked up the infection because he came into contact with someone who'd just come back from a skiing trip in Italy. He didn't know he was dying, and that was really difficult. And I went into the anteroom to take all the double gloves off and the gowns. And I heard him calling my name, but I couldn't go back. I wasn't allowed to go back, so I'll never know what he wanted me for.
A leading public health expert and physician, Anthony Costello, says if it were not for the grave missteps by the British government, thousands of lives could have been saved. A turning point came, he says, on March the 12th, when the government missed an opportunity to quarantine hotspots such as London and try and contain the virus.
When at the press conference, they announced that they were stopping all contact tracing and community testing, that they were moving it all to hospitals, and they were treating it as one epidemic across the country, when we knew that it was just focused in London, maybe 1 or 2 cities in the Midlands, and perhaps up north like Glasgow and Liverpool.
It took another 11 days for the Prime Minister to announce national lockdown measures at a press conference at Downing Street. By then, the death toll had reached 335, and the infection had already spread right across the country.
We just didn't take the action, and at that stage of the epidemic, 1 or 2 weeks can make a massive difference to what happens.
In the city of Southampton, southwest of London, paediatric registrar Alex Armitage is now working with adults for the first time in a decade to help ease the pressure.
Difficult decisions having to be made about end-of-life care and palliative care and who gets to go on the ventilator. So it's very, very strange times for hospital doctors at the moment.
On March 13, when the Cheltenham races were in full swing, Italy had already recorded almost 1,300 deaths from the virus. That nation's death toll is now edging toward 25,000.
And we even had, our Italian colleagues really warning us and saying, this is serious, you've got to take action now. Had we really taken decisive action then, I think we would have seen, we'd be in a position now where we're seeing much less death and disease.
A telling indicator of British complacency to the threat came on March the 3rd from a Prime Minister who would later come close to losing his own life to the virus.
I'm shaking hands continuously. I was at a hospital the other night where I think there were actually a few coronavirus patients, and I shook hands with everybody, you'll be pleased to know.
Don't get me wrong, I'm glad that he's making a recovery and I wish him well, but, in terms of his behaviour, he showed a real lack of leadership and recklessness.
Why was Boris Johnson shaking hands with coronavirus-infected patients on March the 3rd? Why did we allow the budget to go ahead on March the 11th, with all of them crammed up close in Parliament, when we knew that a junior minister 2 weeks earlier had developed an infection and had been walking around Westminster? We almost wiped out our entire high command. The Prime Minister nearly died.
Britain's political leadership may have survived, but across the country, families and friends are mourning in isolation for their loved ones.
Many families are live streaming to all the other people that might well normally have attended.
Maggie Kinloch is a civil celebrant now conducting online funerals and warns when the lockdown finally lifts, the trauma will be deep.
In my experience, I can imagine that this grief, which is grief upon grief, will be more difficult and may well, in some cases at least, have longer lasting consequences.
Anthony Costello believes the UK could become the worst hit nation in Europe.
It's going to be very embarrassing for us. Whether we exceed America or not, I don't know.
The Blakely family was among the first in Britain to lose a loved one to the virus. Now, after more than 15,000 deaths, they fear the extent of the sorrow that British families may have to face.
We've tried not to focus on the anger. To be honest, it just breaks my heart because I know what each one of those families will be going through.
As we heard earlier, the current situation's pretty stressful for teachers. Some of them are missing their students, and they sent us these messages to play for them.
Ain't no sunshine when you're gone. Hello, Glenview State School. Missing you all.
If you do need help with anything, please reach out to us. We're here for you.
In Year 6, sending all the love from my family.
Hi, Kindies. We miss you so much.
And can't wait to sing, dance and play together again.
Hello to all the students.
From their fabulous teacher, Miss Di McCosker, I'm missing you guys.
It's Lily here with Rosella and Bandicoot, and we just wanted to say a big hello to all of our friends at Amaroo School.
A big hello to all my Year 7s.
It's Miss Beck from Montville State School, just letting you know that I miss you all very much.
A big hello to the students of Hastings Public School.
Hi, 4C at North Melbourne. I'm looking forward to working with you in Term 2.
And I'm so looking forward to our first virtual classroom.
Really missing you guys. I'm really finding it hard.
It'd be great to see you back.
Doing some planning for your online learning next term. Just wanting to give a quick shout out to all of my beautiful students.
Hello, I'm awesome A.
I want to say hello to all my 3A family.
I just wanted to give a huge shout out to all our Barker drama students to say hello and we miss you.
We love you and we look forward to our e-learning campus.
I'm sending out all my love to my Year 7, Year 8 and Year 11 students.
We just want to say that we miss you guys.
This is my teaching assistant, Eddie.
We wanted to say a big hi to the grade 5s
PP6 at North Belga. Hi, miss you.
And this is Miss Wolf. Thank you, Portia.
I hope you are staying safe.
Hello to all the students of Trafalgar High School.
Love you all, miss you all.
Bonjour, buenos dias.
Massive shout out to my lovely Year 2 students.
We miss all our beautiful students.
We miss you guys. We'll see you soon.
I miss the 100 string students.
I'm shouting out to all of the students from St Mark's Junior School.
Missing all the students from Upper Yarra Secondary College.
Hi 4T, I'll see you online.
I hope you're enjoying some time at home with your family.
To the butterflies, tell them that I miss learning with them.
Keep practicing your Japanese, everybody. Ganbatte.
School is not the same without all your lovely faces.
Even though term 2 is going to look a little bit different.
This remote learning time has been really strange for me and I miss you all.
But on the other hand, online learning, I've met their pets. They've met my dog Bindi.
Please keep sending me your work. You're doing really well.
Fingers crossed I'll get to see you guys sometime.
We hope that you're all safe and well.
I'm sure you found a way to cope with Instagram, Snapchat. But, sorry to tell you kids, the party's over.
Stay active, stay connected.
Keep learning.
And we will see you very shortly.
Should we give ourselves a pat on the back?
Yeah.
Okay, let's go. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Well done, me.
We miss you.
We miss you.
That's the program for tonight. Next up, foreign correspondent goes on the front line of the COVID-19 crisis in New York City. Thanks for your company. Good night.
Next on ABC and iView, foreign correspondent goes to the front line.